Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'll just scoot this over a little bit. There it is. Yeah, so this was actually made through quarantine, and I started to. Well, I mentioned that I started to work on these things called survival kit series throughout my residency, where I was really making these icons. Basically, they're really large paintings, and they were. I thought of, what would I? One, I was getting ready to go to residency, and I was still kind of coming out of this depression that I was in from this relationship, and trying to figure out kind of like, how to get back on my feet. Basically, telling myself like, come on, let's get moving. It had been way too long that I was still upset about it. So uh, I thought of, I was going to the woods in upstate New York, and I thought about like these tools that I would use. And, one of the first things I thought was like, oh, you have a knife in the woods maybe, right? So my ex had this necklace I bought for her, and it was a dagger. And so I made an ex-lover's dagger. And that was kind of the start of these tools that I would use. And then that went into a canteen. And then that went into a compass rose. And that's boxing the rose piece. That's at Passaic right now. And then I thought of, a flame. You need a fire. So then I did Hearts on Fire. And I started making all these kind of icons for like, if you're like a Boy Scout kid almost. And then my ideas were about using the ASCII language still to represent these, so that it was like kind of this primitive form. And I really liked how the structure kind of sat above the type of organic or tactile way I was going to work at it. So I had this computer language kind of overlaid over this analog painting that I would do that was made of different materials and stuff like that. So some of those pieces have leather in them, old pieces of flannel, clothes. The one I'm working on right now, there's a couple pair of pants in there in the pockets and stuff like that. So I was really broke too, so I wasn't trying to spend $1 on the paintings. And I was using everybody's scrap canvas. And I was collecting scrap canvas and fabric. I was calling artists and asking for them to save me all their cutoffs. All the wood that I used, I was ripping down found wood and on the table saw and making it into stretcher frames. That being said, I could never get like a large stretcher. So all the pieces started being made of way more canvases. So some of my canvases are made of 60 other little canvases put together. And I was also diving into the world of tech and programming, trying to learn a little bit of programming and like trying to keep the rural aesthetic, but trying to bring it to into this world of tech for this clash kind of, which resulted in me making paintings like I thought code would be made. So in all these little blocks that are almost shareable and always open source, so people can just take them and move them around and whatnot. So I really kind of started these multiple blocks of canvas for myself. And it was a way for me to also be mobile. So I didn't have an 8-foot by 8-foot painting. I was able to just take it apart, and all of a sudden I had, 8 2-foot paintings. So I could go from residence to residency, and I didn't have a car, so I was renting cars. So I had to make it pretty, it was economical for me to do that as well. It was kind of like the only reason I could actually make these huge paintings. And it really was just nice as like a building form, it's like I could start the painting, and the next day, if I didn't want to paint right then, I would make some more canvases, stretch some more canvas, make some more tools to make painting. So it was a really productive way for me to work through it. And I, made a set of maybe 10 to 12 paintings like that, 2 of which are at Passaic right now, and somewhere in the show. And so Look, Left, Listen I went back to Michigan for quarantine, and I had made a couple more tools to add to that pack. And I was kind of like, okay, there's the survival kit series, and that I wanted to continue in this block form that I was using with all the separate canvases, still renting cars to get around and stuff. And then Look, Left, Listen, I was in quarantine, and Look, Left, Listen is a quote that they'll use in trading and financial to look at historical data. So don't just make a decision, look left through the data, look left through the charts, and see where previous things have happened in time. And I thought this was really interesting, kind of coming out of the relationship, and I felt like I was kind of being healed. I was done working through this kind of survival period of that and trying to kind of move forward. But it was also quarantine, which was like incredibly stifling as far as moving forward. So I thought Look, Left, Listen was an interesting like title for the work too, where it was kind of like in this state of hesitation. trying to look left, trying to make a decision on what to do. So like in the piece, on the left side of the piece, I have a lot more of like a rural aesthetic. There's some barn beams in there. There's more of like this grass, but I made the grass with ASCII. I made like a night sky. It's a little bit more, you know, dim and kind of a little more messy, you could say, less graphical.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as I moved to the right side of the canvas, I wanted to make it more like a new beginning, like a spring day, with this kind of darker, you know, darker depth to it. Like I was still coming out of it. So, you know, when things are going good, especially in a financial market, it's like, you know, oh, it's just going up and to the right. So the whole piece was kind of composed as up and to the right. And, you know, there's just a lot of different motifs. So I was leaving Philadelphia, so I have like my Flyers jersey like draped over the top of the canvas, which I would, you know, actually drape it over it, trace the shadow, take a picture of it, paint that on there. There's like light coming in through the window. There's ASCII language that actually depicts a cat kind of laying down at the very bottom. And then there's some charting motifs in there. And the necklace hanging through the piece was a St. Christopher's medal that I lost years ago, and had been around with me for my whole life. And I lost it, and I lost it in Easton. I was coming back to Easton, so it was this kind of like transitional piece through quarantine. I was coming off of residency, moving to Easton, and kind of trying to think about some new work that I was going to make, and kind of this new life that I was setting up.
So great. I mean, listening to you reminds me of how much I love your work again.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it.
I mean, aesthetically, I've always loved them, but then I listen to like where they're coming from. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like, there's.
Yeah, I mean, I like making work about, you know, where I'm at in life. I mean, it's hard I think it's it's a little bit of a pigeonhole to get like too deep into one concept and have to stick with that forever.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you shouldn't have to.
No, I mean, life grows. I'm trying to blend the, you know, the aesthetics and keep that like, you know, this kind of rural aesthetic mixed with like this, I don't want to say tech, but this kind of like new virtual type of aesthetic, which we are even getting deeper into. And I think those two worlds like clashing together is really interesting.
It's very much a reality too.
Yeah, it is. And it's like a lot of us, even through quarantine, I think are realizing that, like everybody's making bread and stuff, you know, it's like, there's this, we're moving backwards again a little bit, which I love. I'm like, oh, I know how to do all this stuff. Like, finally, I'll have to start a fire, you know? But I'm just dying to start a fire. But, you know, like one thing I know how to do. So I don't know. I think it's a really nice mixture of, you know, these two types of worlds. And I just really want to keep on playing with that. But as far as like the overall concept, I mean, I'm always thinking of like these kind of new bodies of work to make that, you know, deal with different stuff and different ideas of, you know, right now I'm resourcing all these kind of coming of age symbols from the rural, you know, like fishing lures and arrowheads and jackknives and stuff like that, and trying to think of this coming of age and this independence that you get. And as we reach into the virtual world and kind of get lost into the ether. So I'm trying to, you know, I always try to kind of stay within those roles, like, and take on, you know, every day as it comes kind of thing. Use that as inspiration.
Can we do one more? Because now I'm just curious about this one. Because this one to me is probably like the more abstract of all of them. And I'm sure, you know, there's a rich like story and happening.
Yeah, there's always a narrative.
And then I want to ask you about the color purple, because you're using a lot of purple these days. And I was like, I wonder what that's about. But the piece that I'm looking at that I'd love, if you have a minute, is Freshly Stacked.
Yeah, Freshly Stacked. Pull it up real quick.